All right, it's the top of the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm David Schober. Welcome to Samvera Virtual Connect 2021, Day 2. This is David Schober. I'm from Northwestern University. Oops, my slide's working here. We have a pretty packed schedule, so we'll go ahead and get started right away. First, some housekeeping. Everyone should note that the webinar is live and closed captioning is being recorded. It is also, closed captioning is also available. Simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The conference is being recorded, and after sessions today and tomorrow, we'll have videos available on the Samvera YouTube channel, and slides will be available in the Samvera Community repository. Attendees will receive links to both of those in the days after the event. We have the Q&A function or Zoom chat for any questions. Try to use the Q&A function if you can. We'll also be looking at the Samvera Slack channel, the Connect channel, for any questions that come in that way. If you need access to the Samvera workspace, there's a link in the Virtual Connect program where you can request access, and then go ahead and look for the Connect channel in there. Those of you that were here yesterday know that we have a collaborative community notes in a Google Docs. Someone will post that in the Slack channel again. I believe it's pinned to the top, but we'll just go ahead and post into the Slack channel to make sure it's available for everyone. And we welcome anyone to contribute to that note taking. It's been helpful in years past to have a record of thoughts and ideas. Today's session will run for approximately 3 hours with a 10-minute break. 1 hour from the start. So 1 hour from now, we'll have a short 5-minute, and then an hour from then, we'll have a short 5-minute break. We have an excellent and packed schedule, as always. You can ask questions again in the Slack channel at any time. Someone will get back to you. And again, look for the Q&A. The Samvera community has a code of conduct and an anti-harassment policy, which will be discussed shortly. First, though, I want to give a special round of applause and thank you. Usually I would have these folks stand up at a live conference, but this is the planning committee. We had John Cameron from Indiana University, Franny Gade from University of Oregon, Heather Klein, of course, from Samvera, Ilke Holt from the British Library, April Reiger from Notch 8, and then myself from Northwestern University. I want to thank all of those folks who helped put this conference together, I think in record time. And again, it shaped up to be a great conference. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alicia Morris, who will present our Code of Conduct and Participation Guide. I'm going to stop sharing now so she can go ahead and share.
Okay, thank you. And I am going to share my screen. Can everyone see that? Yeah, okay, well, hello. My name is Alicia Morris, and my pronouns are she, her. I am the Assistant Director for Resource Management and Repository Services at Tisch Library, Tufts University. And I will be going through the participation guide with you. Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free community experience for everyone. From the very beginning, this open source collaborative has been committed to openness and transparency in all that it does. Code, designs, discussions. We are equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. Historically, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups have been excluded from technology work, and ironically, from open source software communities in particular. The Samvera community is committed to removing barriers to participation wherever they exist. The Samvera community is a vibrant, dynamic, and sometimes chaotic place. We believe one of our major strengths is our ability to work together collaboratively, supporting one another personally and professionally. We're not perfect, and we don't always get it right, but we strive to apply all of these principles, each of the values listed here, to all our work and interactions. To the best of our ability, we work to be humble and responsive, not defensive, when someone calls us out for not living up to these intentions. Our community has both an official code of conduct and an official anti-harassment policy. The Code of Conduct expresses our aspirations about how we want to work and interact. The anti-harassment policy provides a framework to address issues promptly and supportively when any member of the community feels subject to any form of harassment. This policy is only one aspect of our broader desire to build a diverse and welcoming community that encourages participation and contribution from all participants without bias. If you see something missing, we invite your input to the policy and in making Samvera a better place. If you haven't already, please take time to review the documents today. We expect participants at all community events and forums to honor these standards. Building on the framework provided by the two policy documents, Samvera community members work together to create and promote a welcoming and safe community. If a situation arises that you feel you cannot address alone, please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the Samvera board, or a helper. They are well positioned and prepared to assist you. Here's the list of current helpers. You might want to take a screenshot of this slide for your reference. You can find us on Slack. Please DM one or more of us if you have a question, any question at all, or any concern, especially if it has to do with our code of conduct or anti-harassment policy. If you see them on Zoom during a Connect session or want to reach out, feel free to use the private chat feature. And we have an email list that you can always use to reach out for helper information. Helpers receive all those messages. For more information about the helpers, look at the wiki and the link is noted here. If you want to become a helper, we welcome new volunteers. It's a great way to serve and support the community, and you learn skills that extend into the rest of your life at work, at home, and in the rest of the world. Message a helper if you'd like more information. Our community is growing. There are always newcomers at Connect meetings. Those of us who have been around a while need to make newcomers feel welcome. We have all been that new person in the room. We all have had that experience of information overload. Let's make a concerted effort to reach out and lend a helping hand to those new to the community. And if you are new and find it difficult to insert yourself into the conversation despite your best efforts, reach out to a helper and let them know. It's not just our event leaders and facilitators who are responsible for making this a fun, welcoming, participatory event. Each of us helps set the tone for how we work and have fun together. If you experience someone dominating the conversation or being dismissive or disrespectful to others, politely let them know or seek a helper for assistance in addressing the situation. All perspectives are invited. In fact, they are needed. Everyone's expertise is valued. Everyone here is a contributor. Here's a reminder that microaggressions are prevalent despite all our best intentions to be aware of our behavior. Microaggressions and subtle isms are little things that we say or do, often without any awareness or intention, that make others feel uncomfortable, misrepresented, underrepresented, or even powerless. Subtle isms include but are not limited to sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, and LGBTQ discrimination and phobias. When in group discussion settings, it is important to repeat contributions, particularly from diverse contributors, and to credit commentors so that their contributions are acknowledged. We all make mistakes. If you catch yourself doing something along these lines, it's not a big deal. Just apologize and move on. If you're new, there's probably a lot going on that may seem unfamiliar or unclear. It's okay to feel a little lost or out of place. Most of us did at first. Many of us have found the best way to get over our initial discomfort is to jump in by asking questions or volunteering to help. We're an agile community working to make things better as we go, and that means everyone is qualified to help. There are no imposters here. And most of all, we want everyone to have fun, learn new things, and move Samvera forward. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Jeremy Friesen from the University of Notre Dame. And I'll stop sharing and turn it over to Jeremy.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be speaking about improving group decision-making, a couple of experiments that I have run with the help of several other people. So, quick introduction about me. I'm Jeremy Friesen from the University of Notre Dame. My pronouns are he, him. I've been a contributor for about 9 years across a wide spectrum of things. My contact information is there, and on the slide, you can tweet at me at Jeremy Friesen on Twitter. I also have a blog, takeonrules.com, that has other contact information for me as well. A little bit more about me. So I've overextended myself. I might be in too many things, and I'm trying to correct that. My children have all begun their scattering, and I miss them. I love working from home, but I really do miss y'all. I've been running some work experiments, just trying to disrupt my habits to make sure that I'm understanding how I best work. I continue to help my partner's business grow and flourish. There's big news on the horizon for us. And I found that I prefer working on the business instead of in the business. So like, how can I help design processes and advocate for true teamwork? This year I discovered I really like writing poetry. And I'm writing code, which feels like poetry, but I'm also kind of enjoying documentation. So I keep playing Frisbee with my dogs, and I'm playing RPGs online. Now, at no point in my childhood, even adulthood, did I say, wow, I really hope I get to attend lots of meetings in which we talk without figuring much out and then schedule another one the following week to do much the same. So I want to see if we can reimagine that process. Observed problem. This was something that I found when I was a hiring manager in particular, but it's about group decision making. We have lots of variants and inputs, and it's a complex social activity. We either meet face-to-face, we meet online, and this decision-making can unduly favor the quick to words, the loud voice, the big voice, the assertive voice. And also I've observed sometimes decisions just come about because of exhaustion and fatigue, and I don't think that's the best path. So can we create some processes to improve our collaborative decision-making? So I went through the introduction. I'm going to shift things up a little bit because I want to put questions in the middle. I want to make sure that I can answer some of those. I did include links and everything, but I'm going to go through experiment number 1. We'll have some questions. We'll do experiment number 2 if we have time, and then I'll have some observations at the end also if there's time. So experiment number 1, we're all somewhat familiar with. At the 2020 partners meeting, I presented an overview of the process of hiring our community manager. Hi, Heather. That presentation focused on the overall project. Today, I'll dive deeper into some of the activities and artifacts of that project. So for a recap, we quickly established an ideal timeline to extend an offer. In other words, we treated hiring as a project with all of its time constraints and scheduling challenges. And I'm very, very thankful for Carolyn, who facilitated and chaired that committee very effectively. She handled the time management aspect superbly. Highly recommend. It was ambitious. We needed to optimize our meetings, which meant acknowledging any of our shared understandings so we can take that time where we're together to expose and go through our differences and opinions. And we also really needed to utilize asynchronous opportunities. None of us were on site together. In fact, none of us were from the same organization, really. So asynchronous meant a lifesaver as we tried to coordinate activities. And we did that through spreadsheets. So I'm going to go through the 4 spreadsheets of the apocalypse. There are the knowledge, skills, and abilities weighting exercise. That's weight as in heft, not we're going to wait a long time. The resume curriculum vitae screening, the question workshopping, and our initial phone screening spreadsheet. There is a link to a shareable folder. I think it's currently protected, but I want to promote this into Samvera. Other organizations have used this and refined it and iterated on it. So I kind of want to move this into the community. So let's dive into each of the spreadsheets. Establishing the weighted KSAs. The goal is to aggregate each person's relative importance score for each KSA. So stop me if you cannot, if no one can see the spreadsheet. There's a README and it says goal at the top and it goes into details. All right. The goal of this one, as I said, is to fill out the KSAs. These were the KSAs that we had in place for the community manager. And this sheet shows the summary that we have, as well as the average. Very important in this is that there's a sheet for each named person. You know, we got Aaron, we got Joe, and so on. So for now, I'll be Joe, and I fill out my decision. I want to weight something. This is all configurable, the numbers, but what's really important is this summary page. We can go and we can now look as a group and say, wow, Chris and Aaron, you're pretty close on self-directed. Hold on here, written communication 6 and 1. What are we seeing that's different? So this tool starts to enable a conversation. And so that's the spreadsheet, the first. I'm going to whip through these really quick because they all have a common theme. So back to the slides. We're going to go to the pre-screening rubric. To help narrow the list of applicants that we will advance in the initial interview. That's its total purpose. So what we take is, again, this individual effort where we say, candidate 1, you know what, I think they meet the requirements, and I strongly agree that they map to the KSAs. I'm not using the weight, I'm just saying, in general, as I look at their things, their CV, I think that they map to it, which then feeds into our decision-making process where we can look at and say, how do they meet the requirements? Looks like we all said, yeah, 1's on the requirements. And we're all in relative agreement that they met the KSAs. So it's a high probability that we collectively will decide we're going to advance candidate 1. That one is to help screen. If you have 50 applicants, you're going to need to make decisions on who you're going to advance to the next round. Next up is spreadsheet number 3. This is the question workshop. This one looks a little bit differently. This was to help the hiring team create a focused list of questions that would help us likely cover all of the KSAs in an interview. So I'm going to open this up. And what this process was each of us individually contributed questions, and then 2 of us paired up and assessed how do these questions probably help us answer the KSAs. So for example, there's a lot of group activity in the Samvera community. Tell us about your experience coordinating. We felt that it would map pretty well to these 5 KSAs: distributed teams, administrative skills, collaboration, communication. But if we look, we had, I'm going to jump down, 50 some questions that we sifted through. And these were individual brainstorming. And then 2 of us really worked at winnowing it down to as few of questions that we then sent forward as written questions to the candidate. So that was good. And then last is, to me, the magic one. It's complicated. So the screening rubric is here to equip each team to individually assess each KSA for each candidate. And again, there's a purpose. We have the summary. We have the different people that they can go in and fill this out. So I'm going to go in as Aaron this time. So on this column, there's a completed. We established that we're not going to be able to all make an assessment about whether or not someone meets the KSAs. But we did say that, you maybe need like 10 of the 15 to say, yes, this is a reasonable assessment. So if we go in and we start filling out, I am very randomly filling out person 1. I'm not doing my due diligence. Eventually, I hope, it will show up as done. Not yet. Too many. Anyhow, I'll go over to the summary page and kind of show this. So the summary, Chris has already done their due diligence. They've filled it out. Their weighted score is 67 out of a possible 101.7. They only evaluated 80% of the KSAs, and the percent score is 67 divided by 101, so 66.3. But there's this column here that says completed, false. What that means is we assumed we were not going to have everybody present at every interview. So we said, in order for this to be group representative, we needed to have quorum. So once we had enough people fill out to our satisfaction the review, then this was a solid completed thing. If we didn't, I think we always met the completed criteria, but had we not, that likely would have meant we need to do something else in addition to follow up on it. So those 4 spreadsheets were kind of walked us through the process to make individual decisions. And in summary of that, I developed these spreadsheets to equip the hiring committee. We did our asynchronous work, and it was pretty quick to accept what we agreed on and then discuss our not yet in alignment perspectives. Like, oh, this weight, I was kind of thinking otherwise. And you can imagine having a discussion with Richard Green, having that, like, we're not in agreement. It was great. Bye, Richard. These discussions were actually very quick and topical because we had these numbers to reflect, to like focus on. And we could see the numeric insight, which provided a little bit of a detachment from someone's vocalized opinion. And I felt that it really helped accept a group decision and leaned a little bit on the aggregate wisdom that we all had in our different perspectives. So I have 8 minutes left. I have another one I can show, but I would like to leave time for questions. I ripped through that really fast.
Jeremy, did you feel like this created a longer, process, or did you feel like it sped it up? It seemed like there's a lot of front loading, but then sped up the process.
So the timeline that we set up when we started we felt was very aggressive, and we actually got it done before the timeline we established. It did require some front loading. I repurposed some of these spreadsheets from past work, but really refined them. And that last screening rubric, I had to really look at mathematically to make sure, like, weighted averages and all that are very hard to get in aggregate. But that preliminary work up front, we collectively delegated to an individual contributor to kind of work on, bring it forward, talk about the process, talk about the tooling, and say, yes, this looks like a good way to go forward. So I felt that it was front loaded, but that front loading made all of the hurry up moments at the end of a hiring process just smooth. So yeah, it was great.
There's no other questions in the Q&A.
No other question. All right. Oh, okay. I'll move on. So experiment 2. This is a project rubric that we used at Notre Dame. And for background, I'm in a new group, and we're establishing a process to evaluate and move projects related to innovation through a predictable life cycle. And the decisions are ours to make, but our process and decisions must be transparent. So again, I'm focusing on the tools, not the specific criteria. And this, you'll see some refinements. What we did is we built a README to help people orient because we wanted them to do it individually. So you need to be able to do that. We had a common vocabulary that were necessary. We had criteria for evaluation, sheets for individual input, and sheets for comparative discussion. Note there is a red-green difference, and I verified with my team there is no red-green colorblind, but there's still numbers, so it's I think acceptable from an accessibility. So this criteria, again, let's not focus on the specifics, but let's go into this is our, how does this map to innovativeness? What is it's not important for this, it's likely not important, somewhat important, critically important. Again, trying to bring a sentiment analysis into this as we walk through these different gates of a project. And each of us, myself, Justin, Rick, and Sarah, looked at this, and we ended up having this spreadsheet that shows our responses. And for those that can see the red-green differences, there's a pretty quick delta where we can say, huh, Rick is not aligned with Justin, Sarah, and myself on R&D capabilities. And what we ended up having was a conversation very much focused on how are we not in line, so we could better understand. In fact, some of these reflect we've already converged our understanding. I think we had one that showed 1, 2, 3, 4 in the group. But again, we could focus on, tell me why you thought of a 1, and tell me why you thought it was a 4. And that facilitated some very rich conversations. And I actually had the quote, wow, this is a fun meeting. I was like, awesome. So this tool is again a refinement, but it demonstrates how to use that that process of gives people space to think on the project and task. All right. So my observations in this is one that I think is very critical is it gives individuals time to think, gives them time to look at it, develop their thoughts, put your notes, get your comments if you want that. Some people love lots of time. Others might go through and just shoot from the hip, proverbially speaking, and just kind of make their snap decisions. It facilitates either one of those. Then by having this spreadsheet, if it presents the differences and similarities in a way that you can visually or quickly digest, you have this meeting where you can talk about how you're aligned or not aligned, these different understandings. And I've found that there's some detachment because I've already said, I don't agree with this. And now here's kind of why, instead of, no, that's wrong, which sometimes I snap to that because I've got my opinion and I might trample on someone else. So this helped me tamp down any tendencies there. It does create space for, I found it created space for consensus in the aggregate. So we could say, you know what, we have a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 2. We'll just take the average and you know what, let's move on. This is one of many things in the aggregate. We don't need to this little detail is not a hill to die on. What it does is at the beginning though, you have to require you need the clarification of purpose. What are we trying to assess? How can we phrase it in such a way that we can do our individual work, but then come as a group to have conversations? I also suspect, and I don't know this, is that it might provide a means of like a meta-analysis of how varied decisions in an organization, how much variance there is. So you might be able to look at the success of a project and go back to some of these early decisions and see higher variance might mean lower chance of success. I don't know, but it is this interesting bit of information you can collect at a clarification stage in a project. This also makes meetings fun. Like seriously, you can quickly focus on some things and talk about things in a detached manner, but also still have like a proverbial horse in this race where you want something, but you can also see it's not a big deal. So with that, I thank you. And I'm on Slack for further questions. I will be sending this forward to Heather, the whole toolkit. There's a README. Other institutions are using it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeremy. That's a great presentation. We're going to jump over now to Samvera's journey toward a new model for fiscal sponsorship. And that will be Heather Klein from Samvera and Rosalind Metz from Emory.
Thanks, David. Hi, folks. I'm Heather Klein. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going to give you some insight into the process of selecting a new fiscal sponsor for Samvera, one with a different model than others in the academic open source ecosystem. So this will be a quick overview. I'll talk about the research and the process that led Samvera leadership to this move and tell you a little bit about our new fiscal sponsor. But first, what exactly is fiscal sponsorship? So it's a term used to describe a practice that has a long history of use by nonprofits. At its most basic, in a fiscal sponsorship, a sponsoring nonprofit accepts and administers funds for activities of another entity in compliance with US tax law. The practice of fiscal sponsorship arose and became important because getting a nonprofit designation in the US is not a quick process, and managing a nonprofit entity requires time and specific expertise. And fiscal sponsorship has inherent risk to both the sponsor and the sponsored project. So the sponsor has to ensure that the activities of the project comply with the requirements of the sponsor organization's tax exemption. And the project relies on the sponsor for really critical legal and fiscal responsibilities. So a little background on fiscal sponsorship when it comes to Samvera. In July of 2019, Duraspace, our previous fiscal sponsor, merged with Lyrasis. And a little less than a year ago, the Samvera Community renewed its Memorandum of Understanding, or its MOU, with Lyrasis that allowed the community to continue as an independent, fiscally sponsored program through June 30th of this year. And we were paying a lower fee for fiscal sponsorship services than what Lyrasis charges for their community-supported programs. So at the time of renewal, Lyrasis asked us to spend a year exploring whether Samvera could become a Lyrasis community-supported program, because that was the model that Lyrasis has in place for fiscal sponsorship. So we learned through our research that our previous relationship with Duraspace and the one that was inherited by Lyrasis, it was at a much lower cost than most fiscal sponsorship arrangements, and it wasn't structured the way most fiscal sponsorship arrangements are. So we are truly grateful to both organizations for having taken on the risk of sponsorship of this community, and we can honestly say we would not be where we are today without their support. So I'm sure all of us in the US who are familiar with the way that US nonprofits work have heard of a 501c3 organization, almost used as a synonym for a nonprofit organization. But the IRS actually recognizes 29 different numbered 501c nonprofit types. I'm going to focus on what fiscal sponsorship means for two of these nonprofit types, the 501c3 we all know, and another one, the 501c6. So 501c3 nonprofits are both tax exempt, and also contributions to these organizations are tax deductible for donors. So these two tax code exceptions mean that a 501c3 organization has to meet certain criteria around its mission and activities, and they need to benefit the public. And there's two common models for how fiscal sponsorship is usually offered by a 501c3. So the most common model is the comprehensive model. This is usually called Model A. In the comprehensive model, the project entering into the fiscal sponsorship agreement with the sponsor is giving up all ownership and control of the project to the sponsor and retains only the right to enforce, amend, or terminate their agreement and have the project transferred to another qualified fiscal sponsor. So the project can maintain a steering committee to guide activities, but the sponsoring organization has the final say on how funds are spent. This Model A sponsorship is akin to a merger and acquisition, and the assets and liabilities of the project are the assets and liabilities of the fiscal sponsor. There's also another model called Model C, the regranting model. This is where money moves through a 501c3 and is granted or regranted to a project that has its own staff and administration. This is more often used as a one-time way to move funds to an entity that's not already a legal nonprofit entity. It's not usually an ongoing arrangement. So 501c6 organizations are tax exempt, but their donations are not tax deductible. So the exempt purpose is to promote the common business interest of its members. So this is the kind of designation you'll see with member organizations or a chamber of commerce. And it gives them a lot more flexibility in fiscal sponsorship because they can use a model called the Series LLC. So in this model, there's 3 distinct but related entities, where the 501c6 nonprofit creates a separate entity specifically to be a fiscal sponsor, and the projects sit within that fiscal sponsor. That sponsor must make sure that the project's activities are not for profit and that they're financially solvent, but otherwise they can be completely hands-off. So the project has real independent governance, a legal entity existence, and donations and other funding can be accepted by the project in its own name. So armed with all of this newfound information about these models, Samvera Steering undertook an ambitious timeline to identify a fiscal sponsor that would be right for the Samvera community. There were 3 organizations evaluated who came to the January retreat and who spoke to steering. So Lyrasis, Code for Science and Society, and Oasis Open. And in order to evaluate these organizations, we actually used a modified version of the spreadsheet that Jeremy just presented. There was some weighting, there was some discussion about what these criteria mean. It was a really good and iterative process. And at the end of the discussion, we came to the decision that Oasis Open, which has that 501c6 model I talked about, offered the community the experience that most closely matched our current relationship with Lyrasis. So while this might sound like a really major change, the reality is that the option requires the community to change the least. So we drafted a recommendation report recommending sort of changing our bylaws and becoming part of Oasis Open, and we had a vote for partners to ensure that everyone was on board with this change, and that passed, and that's how we're moving to our new fiscal sponsor. So this new sponsor is Oasis. They're a nonprofit, international, member-driven 501c6. They were founded in 1993, and they support open standards and open source development. They are actually the home of some familiar standards like SAML and Open Document, and lots of others that you probably haven't heard of. So like the Common Alerting Protocol, that's the protocol that's used for Amber Alerts. And groups at Oasis work autonomously and set their own goals, make their own decisions, but are all committed to openness, transparency, and inclusivity. And specifically, the program that Samvera will fall under is the Oasis Foundation as a Service program. So we've had a really excellent experience so far with Oasis. They've given us a lot of advice, really letting us tap into the wider open source community to learn more about how other projects operate. So that is my super quick overview. And I'm always happy to answer questions, but I want us to move on to the next group. So I will take a look in chat and Slack, and I'm always happy to talk about this process. We really learned a lot.
Thanks. Like Heather just said, go ahead and throw any questions either in the Q&A section or in Slack, and someone will get back to you as soon as they can. Next up, we'll pass it off to Rodrigo and Javier, and they'll be presenting a lightning talk on digital exhibitions from an institutional repository. So Javier, you can go ahead and screen share up.
Thank you, David. Please, Javier, share the presentation.
Yes, sí, mi
We're seeing it. It looks great.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Rodrigo Cuellar. My pronouns is he or him, and together with Javier Cisneros, we are going to talk about how we create a digital exhibition from our institutional repository. We ask that all questions be via chat, please. Next, please. The Library of the College of Mexico has developed a series of digital exhibits with the goal of disseminating the special collections it guards. These exhibits are developed on the Omeka Classic platform. So each one represents a LAMP instance. It means Linux plus Apache plus MySQL plus PHP, and a large number of records and multimedia files. It's important to mention that these records have a good chance of being repeated between the different Omeka instance records and files. And our interest is to be able to centralize all of these records and multimedia files, which mean a saving in develop time, and this is safe for us. Next, please. How we do this? We take advantage of the JSON response provided by Blacklight, which contains a whole structure that allows us to represent documents, search engine, pagers, filters, and facets. For example, you can click on our repository catalog.json and you can see this structure. Next, please. All these structures contained in the JSON response is obtained by Vue.js and represent in an external site, managing the centralized records and multimedia files in a repository and harvest them from independent thematic sites. Other example is this site, violenciapass.colmec.mx/collection de recursos. Next, please. And this is an image you can see our first implementation of this idea. On the right is the view of our repository with the active facet, which represent the collection we want to harvest. On the left, this same view is presented on the site independent of our repository. Thank you, and I send the word to my partner, Javier.
Okay, thanks, Rod. Well, how my partners say, my name is Javier Cisneros, and I would like to talk about why we choose Vue.js to create digital exhibitions. Sometimes we need to show only one collection in a system created previously in a language like Ruby on Rails, Python, the Django, or platforms like WordPress, Joomla, and others. In the past, the way to solve this problem was to create a section in each system with connection to the database and shares all necessary data into the system. This way was correct, but we have a problem. Data replication. All those data exist in our repository, why not use them? So Vue.js has flexibility necessary to create a little system to consume data from Blacklight, process JSON response, and show data in a web view. Also, if we create components without transpiling, we can adapt the code in almost any system that needs special collections and adapt the interface to the system template. In this slide, we can see how works the application. First, the client sends a petition through a route. So view components processing this, and Axios send a HTTP petition to Colmex repository, specifically to Blacklight. This responds with all information in a JSON format. This response is processing for views to manage the state and show the information in a web view. For the other side, Vue.js has many plugins to add different functions. For example, Vux for work with the state of components and manage them. Vue Router to manage routes in a module independent of the system core. Vue 18 to manage language if required, and Axios to manage requests and response obtained from the communication with repository. All this is possible to add as required, to difference of other frameworks. We can add these Vue components if are translates. For example, on WordPress, we need to create a new plugin to can add or Vue modules. In the case of Ruby on Rails, we add all components into Vue's folder and separate JS and CSS in accordance with the system folders distributions. In the future, we are planning create maps using the geolocation data saved in the repository. This with the purpose to show all elements contained in a collection with the same or close location of publication, for example. And so it was a pleasure for you to share with all of you this development. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Javier and Rodrigo had requested that any questions come through in Slack after the fact, just to make it a little easier to respond. So if there's questions, go ahead and put them in the Slack channel and connect. And with that, we have come around to break time. So we'll be back in just about 10 minutes at the top of the hour. We'll see you there soon. And we have a packed afternoon as well.
It's just about noon, so welcome back everyone to day 2 of Samvera Virtual Connect 2021. I'm John Cameron of IU Libraries. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm here to introduce our next set of presenters. Next, we've got Moving In-Person Access Online During the Pandemic from Kate Nesmith, and I'm going to hand it off to them now.
All right. Hi, I'm Ismay Coles and my pronouns are he, him. And with my colleague Kate Lynch, we'll be talking about moving in-person access online during the pandemic. So like many of you, last year, over the course of the spring semester, after dealing with the sort of initial crisis of moving things online, we realized that things weren't going back to normal anytime soon. And so the vast majority of our users weren't going to be on campus for the fall semester. And that meant that we didn't have any way of providing access to some of our core services like course reserves or access to reading rooms for special collections. So we talked to our lawyers about what we could do, and we talked to our library leadership about what we should do. And we concluded that these services were critical to supporting the library's mission to support teaching and research, and that we could do some things to minimize the risk by buying access when we were able to, and diverting requests to existing services that were covered by fair use where that made sense, but that we needed to put a fair amount of content online that we'd never been allowed to put online before. And so we needed to figure out how to do that in a way that was responsible and fell within our responsibilities, which led to developing 2 new services, controlled digital lending and a virtual reading room. So I'm going to talk about controlled digital lending and then hand it off to Kate to talk about the virtual reading room. So controlled digital lending is a thing that we've been looking at for a while as a way of meeting various scenarios for access where people couldn't come to Princeton to look at things and we didn't want to ship items or send them out. So the definition here is an emerging method that allows libraries to loan print books to digital patrons in a lend-like print fashion. So basically digitizing things and then using a physical item as a kind of license to lend something. So before the pandemic, we had a Samvera repository called Figgy that let us, ingest materials, build objects, and embed a digital object viewer in our catalog, in our finding aids application, and various other websites. We also had 2 scanning operations, one in our resource sharing department that was focused on general collections, and Digital Imaging Studio focused on special collections. And those services were scaling up to meet the expected demand over the course of the spring semester of 2020. And by June, we had those scanning services up and running. We'd established a pickup service so that users who were local could come and pick up items. But we didn't have a way to do course reserves. We didn't have a way to do reading room access. So when we decided to do CDL, we decided that we wanted to build on our existing repository and digital object viewer. Those things were working well, and we wanted to keep those, and we felt like the experience was better than a lot of other options we looked at. So what we really needed to do was let users check items out instead of just having them display by default. We needed to limit the simultaneous accesses to the number of physical items. In CDL lingo, that's called maintaining an owned to loaned ratio. And we needed to prevent downloading. So these are basically things to stay within the emerging consensus of what controlled digital lending was and how to be responsibly using a physical copy as a proxy for digital access. So we decided to narrow our focus as much as possible and do one thing at a time. So we developed a workflow for digitizing items and checking them out to a CDL patron. That let us query the ILS to see how many items were available. Then we added the ability to check items out and expire and disable the viewer when the loan period had expired. Then we added a waiting list in case everything was checked out. Then we streamlined the ingest process so that the staff who are scanning could spend as much time scanning as possible and not spend time clicking buttons in the repository. And then we added a button to return an item early so that if you got in and were done with an item in a few minutes, you could return it and let the next person have access to it. And those are really the features that we added to enable CDL service for the fall of 2020. We did fix some bugs. We did handle a couple of edge cases, but that is substantially the work that we needed to do. Along the way, we made a few decisions, and we really tried to be practical about keeping our scope as narrow as possible and deferring complexity as much as we could. So we talked about having different loan periods for different scenarios, like course reserves versus an individual researcher request. But we decided to just have one short loan period that worked for reserves, reasoning that an individual researcher could just check the item out as many times as they needed to. We talked about trying to figure out what time it was, and especially for the wait list, waiting until it was some notion of business hours or when the library was open. But we decided that our users were spread out all over the country and all over the world, and so we didn't know what time it would be for them. And maybe they wanted to read library books at 3 a.m. You know, we really shouldn't prejudge that. And so we decided to just not worry about what time it was. We decided to have a short waitlist time. And when your slot came up, you got an email saying you could get the item. And you had an hour to do that. If you missed your time, we removed you from the list and sent you an email saying, if you're still interested in the item, you can go and add yourself to the list again. So we didn't try to do anything fancy about skipping them or adding them back to the end of the list or anything like that. So here's a quick screencast of what it looks like. You start at the library catalog and you scroll down to the bottom, and where the digital object viewer would be for an open item, you have a button prompting you to log in. So you click on that and it takes you to our single sign-on service. And as soon as you're logged in, it sends you back and it shows you a copyright notice and a button to check the item out. So when you click that button, you get the digital object viewer, substantially the same as an open item. You can page through, you can pan and zoom, you can do all the usual things. There aren't any buttons to download or share because those have been disabled. And we've added up at the top a timer to tell you how much time you have left and a button to let you return the item. And it goes back to the beginning when you've done that. And now I'll hand it over to Kate for the virtual reading room.
Thanks, Esme. So we had a workflow for controlled digital lending, or CDL as we refer to it for short, for general collections items, but we came up against another use case that was rooted in the physical world. That was the reading room. A virtual reading room, to borrow a phrase from SAA's Dictionary of Archivist Terms, refers to an online environment that offers secure access to restricted materials in line with the agreed on access terms of items in a more traditional in-person reading room or archive. Next. Could we go to the next slide, please? Oh, thank you. The needs for the virtual reading room seem similar to CDL, but as we found out, these two things differ in a few key ways. Unlike the own-to-loan ratio of CDL, virtual reading room, or VRR for short, these items are unique and must be viewable on a one-to-many basis, where researchers might go into the reading room solo or in groups to view materials. Further, researchers might be internal to Princeton, or they could be members of the public. And really the driving concern around restricting access was for honoring donor agreements and the nuances of those. Next. We needed, excuse me, we needed a process that met our needs and that, like CDL, was not over-engineered and could scale up. We also had a real-world use case. The course Topics in African American Literature, Reading Toni Morrison, was being taught online in fall 2020. It includes a lot of work around author Toni Morrison's original manuscripts and research materials, and prior to 2020 would involve regular trips to the reading room in Firestone Library. This boiled down to a form of low-maintenance mediated access to ensure that researchers who need it can get access in a timely manner. To accomplish this, we extended the user experience of our digital object viewer in Figgy. Next. When an item is available online for VRR, users can see a prompt to log in with their Princeton credentials. If their user is not associated with the restricted work, when they log in, then they don't see anything. Next. And one more, please. Thank you. So when an item, if they're associated with the restricted collection, the digital object viewer appears once they log in, and they're able to interact with the object the same way that users can with CDL. That is, they can see it, they can zoom in on it, etc. They can't download, however. Next, please. This was implemented by configuring collections in our digital repository with an associated set of restricted access users based on their Princeton accounts. Objects in the repository are linked to collections on the Finding Aids website, and whatever users are associated with them can log in and see the objects. If a user doesn't need access anymore, the collection configuration can be updated very quickly for people to be removed. Princeton accounts for external users are created by special collections staff sponsoring individuals for guest accounts with the university using a service offered through Central IT. A list of who needs access to which collections and for how long is maintained by special collections staff and reviewed regularly in library IT for updating collection configs as needed. Next. And here's some of the impact that we're seeing. VRR usage is a linchpin of access, but is predictably not exploding, which is a good thing. It allows us to maintain this dual maintenance, dual review workflow. We have begun expanding that service to other collections and are seeing that the workflow is not just appropriately scalable, but also flexible enough to work with different levels of granularity. And controlled digital editing has really taken off. These are some of the usage numbers I pulled last week for full items we've digitized and their usage since the service launched. In both cases, this demonstrates that CDL and VRR are needed and close a gap in traditional service models that became intensely magnified when our service models had to change. Next. Some lessons learned. CDL and VRR are similar, but not the same. There was definitely a point at which there was this implicit assumption that we'd made where they were similar enough to be indistinct for implementation, but that fell apart when it became apparent that we needed something a little different for VRR, but we were able to ramp up and think through those complexities a lot faster having started with CDL. Any access is better than none. CDL and VRR are not a substitute for browsing the shelves or being in the same room with rare materials that you're passionate about, but they open up access and allow for the possibility of anybody who needs access, whether they're at Princeton on campus at 3 in the afternoon or on the other side of the world at 3 a.m., to get access to their research and development needs. Considering scale is also important. Controlled digital lending meant streamlining workflows from repository ingest to handling, scanning, and sequestering materials in order to craft a service that we anticipated would be in high demand. By contrast, VRR as a service was not going to explode overnight, but required mediation and clear communication about who needs access and when. In short, we prioritized efficiency where we can realistically anticipate rapid growth and plan to revisit other processes in the event of untenable volume later. Next. Features that didn't make the cut weren't necessary. As Esme said, we considered many things in implementing our services and put some features in the icebox with the idea we'll do this if and when we need it. And in many cases, that didn't happen because it evidently didn't need to. The service that we designed fulfilled the need. It's hard to turn off popular services. These services were rolled out in response to the pandemic, along with other access services like physical and digital pickup. And as much as we can, it does not look like we could simply turn these off without considering the major impact it would have on users who've come to rely on them. And finally, we recognize that rolling out entirely new services like this takes a lot. When we started thinking about CDL, there was a shared sense of importance and immediacy to this work that allowed stakeholders to make decisions, which in turn allowed developers to drive implementation, triage vital features over nice-to-haves, and allowed departments to start working and providing feedback rapidly. This project was able to succeed because of a unified focus where multiple departmental priorities aligned and where our shared contributions were moving toward a common goal. Next, please. And here are the names of many of the amazing people at Princeton who helped make this happen. We offer a humble thank you to them, and I thank you for your time. Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you. We do have one question, which is, do you see this continuing to grow after needs related to the pandemic scale down?
I do. I really feel like now that we have this capability, we are going to get requests for it, and it will continue to be a thing that people want. Even when our undergrads are on campus and our faculty are on campus, we have a lot of people from around the country that want to access our resources. We currently ship a lot of items around to consortial members and other people for access, and I think we'll be looking at these services for replacing some of that as much as possible.
Get a couple more minutes for any questions that roll in. Thank you so much, Kate Nesmay, for that presentation.
Oh, there's one more
This was a good
question
question.
that I
coming in?
saw
Oh,
in the
great.
chat about, does VRR create extra work for special collections staff?
I could take a stab at this. I think that the mediation process that we've talked about, that certainly is part of, there's extra work to be done there. And in the event that guest accounts need to be created, that's additional work. We were aware that this was going to create more work. So in engineering the process, we tried as much as we could to make it, make the communication aspect the part that requires the most intervention and not make it technically laborious. And I think for the most part, we really did a good job there.
Are there any questions that came through Slack? Let's see. Okay. All right, then yeah, we're going to move on to our next presentation. Thank you so much, Kate Nesmay, for that presentation. Next up is Julie Hardesty, Hyrax product owner. So I'm going to hand it off to Julie.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. All right. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Hardesty. I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University. I go by she, her, and I'm serving as a Hyrax product owner right now. I also want to start by acknowledging that I am speaking to you today from the indigenous homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. I want to honor the communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University is built on these homelands and resources, and these people are the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. So a little bit about Hyrax. Hyrax is a Rails engine, so it is not on its own a web application. What this means is in order to build a digital repository using Hyrax, you mount the Hyrax engine within a Rails application. And we call an application that mounts Hyrax a Hyrax-based application. So you might see that that terminology in and around the community. Once a Hyrax-based application is running, it provides a user interface for common repository features, like creating repository object types on demand, depositing content via multiple configurable workflows, and describing content with flexible metadata. There are also many optional features that can be turned on in the administrative dashboard that's available or added through plugins. And it's also possible to use the universal viewer for IIIF enabled content within Hyrax or Hyrax application. So I'm going to give some updates within the Hyrax world from the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group and the Hyrax Interest Group. And I'll start off with the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group. And this group is charged with supporting the core maintenance and development of Hyrax. So that includes addressing bugs and other issues and reviewing pull requests, but it is not meant as a replacement for community-led development efforts or contributions. And at this point, we are in a cycle for the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group, January through June this year. And pardon me, my cat is coming through. There we go. So this current cycle, these are the members for this cycle: Crystal Richardson from Notch 8, Daniel Pierce from Indiana University, Ying Tran from Notch 8, Jeremy Friesen from the University of Notre Dame, Jessica Hilt from UC San Diego, Rebecca Kotze from UNC Chapel Hill, and Tamsin Johnson from UC Santa Barbara. And I want to thank all of these folks. It's been fantastic to work with them, and I'm very thankful for their contributions. And how we're working through this cycle is we started at the end of January, and we've been doing 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So a 2-week sprint of doing work and then 2 weeks of not having a sprint, and then we come back together. So, so far through this cycle, we've worked through 3 sprints. We've just started on our 4th sprint, and we've had a lot going on. So I kind of was updating stats a little bit this morning, and overall, since we began in January, we've had 445 issues that have been hanging out in GitHub for Hyrax, and we are down to 381 issues that are currently open. So through the work of the maintenance working group, as well as community effort, there have been 64 issues closed since January, which is fantastic. We've also finally been able to finalize Hyrax 3.0.0 and release that with a wide variety of user interface improvements, metadata updates, and bug fixes, as well as significant internal improvements. And that happened in the last sprint that we were doing. And as we were working through that sprint after that 3.0.0 release, there were more fixes and improvements that were completed. And so by the end of the sprint, we were also able to release Hyrax 3.0.1. So I think this is something you're going to be seeing. We're going to be trying this method of small and frequent releases to keep things moving forward and help any fixes become established and available sooner. And what we're kind of working through at this point is trying to reduce the big things. So much of this is due to, we've been viewing these things with the labels that have been applied to the issues that have been hanging out in GitHub. And much of that applied labeling is thanks to Tamsin, who did a lot of work before I even came on as product owner to apply labels. And so I really thank Tamsin for helping that along and getting things set up like this. So we've been able to clear all issues that are considered blockers and accessibility blockers, which I'm really happy about that. And we also have milestones for the different versions of Hyrax that have come out. So within the 3.x milestone, we currently now only have 8 open issues that are labeled as bugs. Overall, even outside of that 3.x milestone, we only have 6 issues that are considered priority to address. So I think we are progressing through reducing the big things. So next up, we are continuing. We still have 3 more sprints for this cycle, and we're continuing with this cleanup. And overall, regardless of the milestone, we have 60 issues that are open and labeled as bugs. There are 28 issues that are labeled as accessibility concern, and I am interested in prioritizing those to address what might be happening there and figure things out. And then we also have 9 issues that are labeled for documentation updates. And I would like to shape that up as well during this cycle and see if we can have the documentation in as good a shape as possible by the end of the cycle. So planning ahead, the next sprint cycle for the maintenance working group begins in July. And we'll still be seeing cleanup work to do because that issue list is still going to be there. But there are also some other things going on that are going to affect or shape how the maintenance working group is working. So there's an IMLS grant application that's out, and we don't know about it yet. But if the grant application is successful, this is for Hyrax work. There's a focus on better API access, improved accessibility, additional content types out of the box, improved permissions and access controls, and better infrastructure and deployment options. So that's one route that might shape what the maintenance working group is helping with or working on. And related to that, in addition to that, there's the Roadmaps Alignment Group is gathering information from partners and others about local implementations and customization work to establish if there are any local code changes that could be contributed back to the Hyrax code base. So that's something else that's out there that's happening, and kind of triangulating all of that in the issue list that currently exists. There are about 110 issues that are labeled as enhancement. So my guess is that that list of enhancement issues are likely to have overlap with things in the grant, as well as things that might relate to any code reclamation possibilities. So the maintenance working group, I think, is going to be geared towards facilitating this sort of work, in whatever shape that takes, starting in July. So that is the maintenance working group update. And I also want to talk a little bit about the Hyrax interest group. So the wiki has this as the charge for the Hyrax interest group, and it's showing as the core leadership and management body for the Hyrax roadmap. It's home to the Hyrax maintenance working group, which has these roles defined as part of the working group. And it's facilitated by the Hyrax product owner. So I'm serving as facilitator for the Hyrax interest group as well. So what that means in reality is that we are really kind of just getting started as an interest group. We've been meeting monthly. So we've only met a few times since I've started as product owner, since I started serving as product owner in October. And we do have monthly meetings that happen on the second Wednesday of the month at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. So I'm inviting anyone that is interested to join that. It happens right before the weekly Samvera Tech Call, if that kind of helps you see that in the Samvera Community calendar. And so far, the interest group has helped with policy discussions around Hyrax, for instance, with browser support decisions, and also looking at desired output for supporting Google Scholar citations within Hyrax. And we've also discussed where's the best place to publish policy decisions about Hyrax. And right now we're looking at that as a section in the GitHub README. So you'll see that that's actually shown up recently. So moving forward for the Hyrax interest group, this is an interest group. And so I don't know that I want to put too much leadership responsibility on the group itself, because I want it to be open to anyone interested in Hyrax or with questions for the community. And I want to keep that openness and engagement. But we do have the Hyrax roadmap, and the interest group is looking at that now. And I think that's going to be providing guidance for future Hyrax work. So heading into this next cycle of work, we should have some things that will happen that will help identify what we could focus on with the working group. And then I think the interest group is going to be able to help prioritize how that work goes in considering the roadmap. So particularly when it's going to involve new features or enhancements, I think that discussion in the interest group is going to be helpful. So I do want to have the interest group be as engaging and welcoming as possible to invite interest from the community. I also see the interest group as a potential way to attract new participation in the working group. So if you have thoughts about what is it like to work on the working group and be part of that, the interest group would be a place to potentially come and find out a little bit more about that. So that is the update that I have for Hyrax, and thank you for your time today. And please let me know if there are any questions.
I do have one quick question. What does supporting Google Scholar citations in Hyrax mean specifically?
There are meta tags that Google Scholar is looking for, and there's been some work in Hyrax to offer those those meta tags up based on metadata for the item that's showing. And there were some adjustments that were suggested and were discussed with how those meta tags were being made available. So that was what the work was about. It was already there, and there was just like some adjustments that were being made.
Great, thank you, Julie. Next up is the Hyku product owner update from Kevin. So Kevin, I will hand it off to you. Kevin, you're muted, I think. We can't hear your audio.
Okay, take two. Thank you,
There
John.
we go. Okay.
So for those just tuning in, I'm Kevin Kochansky. I chair the Hyku interest group, which meets the last Thursday of each month. Rob Kaufman is product owner for Hyku. And there's a lot going on in Hyku this year, so I will get to it. Love to welcome newcomers. Most people here probably know a little bit about Hyku, but in short, if you don't, it's built on the Hyrax engine that Julie was just telling us so much about, and it turns Samvera into a turnkey application that folks can just kind of deploy and stand up with a lot of customization features. It shares a lot in common with Hyku since it's based on it, but the thing that a lot of people talk about, or with Hyrax, sorry, with the thing a lot of people talk about with Hyku is the multi-tenancy. So in one instance of the software, we have multiple repositories that can exist discretely in one deployment. It also has a lot of other features like multiple work types and more built-in user management options. The biggest news this year, I guess, is that 3.0 came out. That bumps things up to Hyrax 2.9, Rails 5.2, Ruby 2.7. There's already plans and work to get Hyku compatible with the latest Hyrax release. Bulkrax, the import-export gem that Hyku kind of defaults to, is now behind a feature flipper at the tenant level. And Contact Us for the email configuration is now customizable at the tenant level, which is really great because when different organizations might share one instance of the software, they can now have more of a unique identity in their individual tenant. User management elevation includes a super admin role across tenants and the ability to disable the app level authentication for those who want to implement custom SSO. Theming improvements have come aboard, including improved functionality on how the thumbnails work on the tenant level. And embargoes and leases have been upgraded so that they now can auto-release with background jobs. Work continues on Bulkrax. For those who might not know, this is easy to use right in the admin interface. Administrators can create, edit, delete, run, and rerun imports. It's now collected to browse everything. As I mentioned, it's behind a feature flipper now, so you can turn it off. And the list of formats that it supports for ingest and export is growing all the time. A lot of what's happening in Hyku is funded by some grant projects. So just some quick updates on those that I'm sure we'll hear about elsewhere as well. Advancing Hyku is the large project from the Arcadia Charitable Fund with the British Library, University of Virginia, and Ubiquity Press. And I think as last year wrapped, they were in the middle of a community survey so that they could prioritize and align work, eliminate redundancy between efforts in the community. I know they've contributed work on DOI minting and the embargo and lease features, and are also working on ORCID integration. And at advancinghyku.io, they regularly update a blog and roadmap, so that's a great place to check out. One thing that I think we'll hear a little bit more of a little later in the Advancing Hyku presentation, they were using a GitHub board as a way of tracking issues. And Okay Holt is kind of leading a effort in the Hyku community to collaborate on one board. So she's created that at the Hyku repository on GitHub, and that's going to allow us to put feature tickets across all projects in one place for visibility, collaboration, and stewardship across all those projects. Other grant-funded project is Hyku for Consortia between PALMI, PALC, and Not8, the library consortia. And that is a multi-tenant application for their member institutions. Collaborative workflow developments are being contributed back. They've successfully integrated bulk racks and have been using that for import. And currently, Not8 is working with them on wrapping some multiple theming templates that are really going to help accommodate different use cases within Hyku. Here's a preview. This is one of the Hyku delivers a out-of-the-box kind of front-end experience, but these templates are adding a cultural repository look, an institutional repository, and a new neutral look for the interface to give people more options without having to have that custom development. The image I have here, you're going to see a presentation in a little bit from April and Leanne at Not8 that have much better visuals, so stay tuned for that, but we're still excited about it. And this is going to be something that people can do right in the admin dashboard. PALMI and PALC are also have submitted a proposal for a new IMLS grant, and if that is successful, barriers to adoption will organize 3 years of work around generous user testing and feedback. Some work that they expect would be done under this grant would be further work on metadata flexibility, web accessibility, and improved file handling. And I know that as an organization, they are continuing to develop Hyku for their consortial business model. Other community updates to share include Ubiquity Press. They are working on integrating other Ubiquity products with Hyku. So that includes journal and book OER publishing and the Ubiquity Analytics platform they have for reporting. They also have several migrations underway from platforms including bpress, DSpace, and SobexCM. University of Louisville is working on their own Hyku implementation. That is exciting to get updates from them because I know they've been exploring this for a long time. It's a cultural heritage content repository featuring a lot of local newspaper collections. They will be migrating 100,000 complex source materials out of Content DM and into Hyku. They're currently testing bulk racks ingests on a development server. They're exploring enhancements to functionality and displaying the compound objects, and look in the next phase of their work to get a production server going and develop their front-end design. The shared research repository from the British Library and their partner institutions. That's a shared repository of 6 separate tenant repositories on a single instance of Hyku. Some of the features that they've contributed include data site integration for DOI creation, and they're undergoing a new phase of work starting now that is going to involve CoSector and Not8. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the coming months. Not8 is currently wrapping the National Transportation Library with the US Department of Transportation. SSO integration is getting across the line. Who knew that would be difficult with the federal government, but we're getting there and we're pretty excited. And this project involves the ability to edit control vocabulary fields, which will get contributed back. And it's also unique because of some custom work on mediated deposit workflow. The Newman Numismatic Portal with Washington University in St. Louis is starting kind of a final phase of work on implementing a book reader for searchable, flippable PDFs with transcripts. And our newest kind of member of the Hyku family, Not8 just started work with Andrews University for the Adventist Digital Library, which will provide access to Seventh-day Adventist historical and theological materials. And that's a collaboration between Andrews and other colleges, and will involve migrating from an existing Islandora application into Hyku. This will use 2 tenants, and one of those will be citation only with no fileworks. Right now, we're just doing the initial deployment and getting started on theming work. hosted service solutions out there. Ubiquity hosts U repositories, and Hyku Up hosts, Notch8 hosts Hyku Up. So those are worth checking out. And I invite you to follow us. Samvera Slack is a Hyku channel, which is a great place for people to drop in and ask questions. We also have a Google list and the Hyku interest group. Here's a little more information. It's 8:30 Pacific, the last Thursday of each month, which should be next Thursday. And we really welcome people who just want to kind of listen in or ask some questions. And that is a really long and complicated link, but essentially you can find details on the Confluence for the Hyku interest group. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Right, it's 12:40, so move on to the next presentation. There's one question in Slack about editing control vocabulary fields. Let's see, and then next up is me for the Avalon product owner update. I'm going to switch my share. Okay. Hi, I'm John Cameron. I'm the product owner for Avalon Media System, and this is the Avalon update for Virtual Connect. Doing the quick, what is Avalon? Avalon is a Samvera solution bundle for audio and video access. So we have a lot of features that are specifically designed for our kind of system, easy transcoding, access control features. We've been supported in the past, grants from the Mellon Foundation, IMLS. And our latest release, Avalon 7.2, is available and in use at a good number of institutions. So the Avalon team, you can see our names here. So the one thing I want to mention is we have a new lead dev on the Avalon team, Michael Johnson. So I want to welcome him to our team and to the community. And then one name is missing on here, our longtime DevOps wonderkind Fungbin took a position outside the university. So we wish the best for him. We miss him. Right now it's just Michael and Donaji as developers who are full-time on Avalon. So what's new in Avalon 7.2 released in November 2020. So going over this real quick, we added support for supplemental files, so any kind of arbitrary files to attached to objects for users to be able to view and download. We revamped the user interface for file management to allow more people to upload those sort of supplemental files and manage them within the application. Moved to Sidekick for job management, improved some login flow, and then made it easy for people to manipulate the objects themselves. So moving media files from one thing to another or splitting them up, different kinds of management on the sort of item level. So coming up next, our next release is going to be Avalon 7.3. And the big sort of marquee features here are Google Drive and Browse Everything. So, getting media into Avalon, of course, is always something that needs consideration. And we're hoping to use Browse Everything to hook up to Google Drive and allow that to be used for ingesting new media into the system. Transcript display support. So right now we're working on the ability for users to upload transcripts in a variety of different formats and then have that be able to be rendered out in the viewer. So that's being built out as a React component, which is kind of part of our long-term strategy to make Avalon more modular, so we can write these components so that they could be used not only by Avalon, but by the community more easily in general. And other things that we're adding in for this release, which is upcoming, are improvements, media file handling and processing, and that's a better analytics support. And then, so after that, we still want to continue our work on our Hyrax-based Avalon. And the Avalon team had done work to, migrate our existing Hyrax-based solution bundle to Hyrax 3. And so as we pick this up again, getting on the latest version of Hyrax, still being engaged members of, Hyrax development and being a big part of that is a goal for us. Continuing work on our custom AV type, and then working on the Avalon IIIF player, which is our IIIF sort of based media player. And so Donaji gave a great presentation on that yesterday. So if you're looking for more details, you can always look at that. The repository is currently in Samvera Labs, and upcoming, we're hoping to have a public 1.0 release where people can actually, just go and grab it from a repository, put it in your app, and, call it good to go. Avalon is not on Hyrax currently. We are still using Stack. Yeah, but this is very exciting. This is something that we've been working on and are excited to share, and that people are very interested to see from us. And so sort of along those same lines, we are very involved with IIIF. I want to shout out Marie Whitaker on our team, who's now a member of the IIIF editorial committee. And when we, work on our IIIF based player, we're working on modeling data in IIIF, handling that data, working sort of at the edge of the spec and helping to work on cookbook recipes to, help people who are also looking to implement presentation 3. And then I want to mention Avalon Turnkey. So this is our AWS-based solution for deployment. And shout out new production implementers, Oberlin and Emory, who are using this stack. And I think the work that we put in to make Avalon work in AWS and set all this up has really paid off, in the ability for people to actually take it and use it and stand up Avalon and get it running at their institutions. So you can always get in touch with us. We have many ways: Slack, mailing lists, and on our website. So that is it. That's my quick 5-minute presentation on Avalon. So thank you very much. I'm going to go back to our Connect share, and we're going to take a 5-minute break and come back, and we'll see you very soon. All right. Thank you so much. right. Welcome back. This is the last hour of Samvera Connect, Samvera Virtual Connect 2021. And next we are going for working group updates. My slides are off. There we go. Working group updates. Great. So we've got a few working group updates. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you guys go.
So I'll kick off with the Samvera Marketing Working Group update. My name is Chris Orr. I'm from the University of Hull in the UK. My pronouns are him, he, him, his, and I've been involved in Samvera for many, many years. But it's great now to be working with the marketing of Samvera, not least because recognizing all the fantastic work that takes place in the community. It's really nice to make sure that, yes, thank you very much. Problem with my microphone. I'm really sure that it's really nice to be able to sort of sell it to people outside the community as well, and that's as much about what working group is looking to try and do. So I'm going to share my screen to show a few slides. That one. Can I check that everyone can see that now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so kicking off. Oops, sorry, no. So just as a recap of how we operate as a working group, we meet regularly every fortnight on Wednesdays at 11:30 Eastern Time. And in fact, it would have been today that we would have met, so the next meeting will be in a couple of weeks' time. We have a Slack channel, marketing_WG, for any suggestions, conversation, chat about marketing matters related to Samvera. And we also have our wiki page at the link there on the new Confluence site, where all of the, we have some resources on there related to, for example, the Google Slides template and also a PowerPoint slide template. We also have a leaflet if people want to make use of a leaflet. Difficult in these times when we can't exchange paper goods very easily, but it's there in case you would like to use it in helping to communicate and tell other people about Samvera. And we also have all the notes and minutes from the various meetings of the working group, so you can see what initiatives we've been getting up to. I'd like to put out a big thank you to all the members of the marketing working group listed there below for all their work and contribution towards the group as we move along. So there's a number of things I wanted to highlight today. A couple of that I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to hopefully try and show a video which talks about one of the others as well. First one I wanted to talk about is a piece of work which was stimulated by Heather as community manager when she came into Samvera, wanting to find a way of structuring the way that we use the various communication channels that we have. So if you look, and the basis of that is by recognizing what are the long-term goals of the community. And there's one goal that's been settled on here, which is to grow and strengthen the Samvera community. But from that long-term goal, we can then track back in terms of, well, how do we get there? What are the intermediate outcomes? And from the intermediate outcomes, we can determine what our short-term outcomes might like to be. And based on understanding all of those, we can understand what information we need to communicate and what are the best channels through which we can communicate that information. And this logic model map helps us to make those connections right back from that long-term goal through to how are we going to use the different channels that we have in order to send out the messaging, the communications that we feel would help us in the long term achieve that overarching goal. I realize there's a lot of arrows on this, but they all do make sense if you follow them through. We wanted to make you aware of it. We very much welcome feedback on it, and we'll then also be looking to share it in order to help prompt engagement with the different communications that Samvera as a community will be looking to put out. Another recent development, very recent indeed, is the recognition that One of the great benefits of working within the Samvera community is the people we work with and the work they do, and throughout it all, the way that we share with each other. It was recognized that a number of other communities have ways in which the thanks that we have for the people we work with and the work that they do can be shared. And taking a lead from that and learning from the way it works elsewhere, which is generally works very well, the hashtag gratitude Slack channel has been created. And I say recent, it was created yesterday, but it has already been actively used. And we would want to encourage all members of the Samvera community to use that channel to express thanks, gratitude for the people you work with in the community and also the work that they do, so that we can recognize that and that your thanks for people in that community can be shared, so we can all appreciate the efforts and contributions that people make within the community. Please take a look, please make use of it. We also welcome your feedback on how it's used and ideas for developing this way of engendering community spirit, engendering community engagement and appreciation amongst ourselves going forward. So the next one I want to do is I'm going to try and share a video which has been put together by one of the members, Charlotte at Lafayette College, who's been working with student workers over the last few months to produce a prototype repository tour of Samvera repositories. And she describes it more fully in the video, which I will now try and share. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and then share another one. Now we're hoping to get this working, but the microphone's not great, so I'm going to hopefully say this and turn it up as loud as it possibly can so you can all hear it.
Tool out of the Knight Lab at Northwestern University.
Oops, sorry, I'll go back to the beginning.
Okay, hello. So my name is Charlotte Nunes. I'm Director of Digital Scholarship Services at Lafayette College Libraries. And I'm a member of the Samvera Marketing Working Group. And we recently decided in the marketing group that we thought some kind of a map, some kind of like a geospatial representation of Samvera repositories could be a good communication tool. So I'm going to share with you today a sort of a prototype that we have going of a Samvera story map using StoryMap.js, which is a tool out of the Knight Lab at Northwestern University. I want to acknowledge the student workers at Digital Scholarship Services at Lafayette College Libraries who worked on this map, and that includes Grace Walker and Kaknazar Shayantov. So I thank them very much for their work putting this map together. I'm going to just kind of click through, give you a sense of the contents of the story map, and you'll also have access in this presentation to links to the story map as well as our Google form to collect contents for the map. And I'll say more about that in a moment. So this is the landing page of the map, Samvera Repository Online Tour, and you just click through. And you can see that each slide is geolocated on the map to the left. And each slide includes information about the repository that's being highlighted, a link to that repository, and an item of note. We thought it would be fun to have, sort of a particularly notable holding represented from each repository. So each slide includes an item, a notable item from that repository, and just a little bit of descriptive information about that repository. So we have a number of Samvera repositories represented in this story map so far, but ultimately we would love for it to be pretty comprehensive, as comprehensive as possible. And just one more thing I'll point out about the story map is the map overview function over here in the upper left-hand corner. And that just gives you just a little bit of a zoomed out bird's eye view of the pins on that. So that's the story map. And as I mentioned, we welcome new content for this story map. So I also just wanted to show you our repository online tour submission form. So you can see it's very straightforward. We just ask that each repository, a representative from each Samvera repository submit basically the name of the repository, the link to the repository, purpose of the repository, and just a link and brief description of one particularly notable holding in the repository. So very straightforward, should really only take a minute. So we really would welcome your input in this form if your repository does not yet have representation on the story map. I wanted to just read a quote. So Grace Walker, I asked Grace if they would be interested in co-presenting today, since they were responsible for really putting this map together in the first place, configuring it, sort of just getting it going. And they couldn't join us due to scheduling conflicts, but they provided this reflective, little reflective language. So I'll read that. This is from Grace. I really enjoyed working on the Samvera repository story map. It was super intriguing to read through all the database's information and use this platform to create an engaging and informative map for readers to click through. Story map is a very intuitive platform to use, and I really enjoyed playing around with the different design options and adding in images until settling on a uniform display that you all liked. I am definitely looking forward to working the story map again. So we did, the marketing group did review several iterations of this map before we settled for accessibility purposes on the black background slide with the white text. So once again, big thanks to Grace and Kaki for their work on the story map. And I'll leave it there. And although I can't be with you all today, I believe the other members of the working group would be happy to take your questions.
Okay, so thank you very much to Charlotte for putting that together. And there are a couple of links that she mentions there about how you can view the story map and take a more detailed look at it, and also how you can submit your own repository to the map if it's not currently included. Otherwise, I'll stop share and say thank you. That concludes the update from the marketing working group.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And it was a great video, and I'm glad to see I'm not the only one who loved seeing the logic model. That was really cool. And next up for working group updates is the Samvera branch renaming working group. So I'll let Kate take it away.
Thank you. All right, I will share my screen. Get rid of some of these extra Zoom things. All right. So hello, everybody. My name is Kate Lynch, and today I am providing a short update for the branch renaming working group's progress in 2021 on behalf of the folks listed here who make up our current group. Just to give some quick context, when we talk about branches here, this is Git branching, which is a feature of version control systems that allow shared code bases in a repository to be worked on over time by multiple people with their own local copies. And changes are encapsulated in branches in these local copies, and things like issues and pull requests rely on the presence of the default branch for a smooth shared workflow. For years, it's been common practice for the default branch to be called master. And as a result, you can see this harmful language not only in branch structure, but as a result, it permeates code bases and our common language in software development communities, with references to the master branch in code, readmes, tutorials, and more, both in and out of GitHub. So the Samvera branch renaming working group formed in July 2020 with a mission to uphold the Samvera community's code of conduct and reflect our core values by eliminating coding jargon that perpetuates racist systems, languages, and mentalities, by renaming the default branch of Samvera projects to an appropriate and meaningful term instead of the harmful term that we saw here. In 2020, our group made progress by recommending and getting community acceptance of the term main for the default branch name of projects, and we began researching and testing tools and methods for remediating existing projects, assessing areas of impact where things might break in development and deployment pipelines when replacing the base branch name, and how we might work with the component maintenance group moving forward to make the changes in the community. Interestingly, in fall 2020, GitHub announced some changes of their own. As of October, all new repositories would have the default branch name of main, which is great. And they further announced that by the end of 2020, they would be having tools put in place on GitHub proper for what they called a seamless transition for renaming the default branch, which would just take care of several of the tricky areas of impact that our group had been assessing, such as open pull requests, branch protection rules, and more. So with that in mind, it meant that prioritizing areas of impact and figuring out how to address them is really going to change potentially, hopefully becoming a lot easier in most cases if and when changes from GitHub became available. So it was decided that our group should pause until the communicated time that GitHub said they would roll this stuff out. And then we were going to reconvene and assess where we were based on progress, whether it had been made, and go from there. And it happened. We had one slightly weird meeting in December where nothing much had changed yet. And but then a couple of our members reached out to GitHub and got early access to some of the seamless transition features that then became available to everybody in January 2021. And just as a really quick tutorial, here's how it works. In addition to main now being the default branch for new repositories, existing repository remediation through GitHub is a lot easier. Going into the branch settings for a repository, you see this little pencil now. And if you click on it, you can rename your base branch, and it just works. It redirects open PRs, it moves branch protection rules, redirects web requests. So if somebody has your old master branch bookmarked or referenced in an issue or something, it'll redirect to main. It gracefully handles API requests, and it provides a lot of feedback for users in their local environments, like a notice for contributors when they visit your repository after the default branch has been changed, and feedback at the command line when a user references the outdated branch. However, it does not prevent the recreation of a branch called master, as you saw in that command line display. Somebody could still accidentally create the branch on the remote. Our group did some testing and had some back and forth communication with GitHub, and we determined that once a branch with that name is up there, a lot of the GitHub magic that forwards to main breaks unless you remove that branch. And there is not a good way through GitHub alone to prevent the recreation of that branch right now. Users can also override default branch name settings for new repositories to use outdated terminology. However, with some additional brainstorming and work, our group has a pretty good idea for how to handle this in Samvera. Colin wrote this awesome Circle CI test that I have linked here that can be copied into any repository that uses Circle CI. It checks for the presence of a branch called master whenever the code is pushed to the repository, and it will cause CI builds to fail if that's there. You remove or rename the branch, and the test passes. Still pretty new work in our group, but it's a really promising approach to helping catch errors in the event that someone accidentally pushes an outdated local branch in a community project. We're also drafting language to go into the contributing content for Samvera code contribution guidelines, instructing about branch naming conventions and norms in the future. So with this in mind, we're really excited to have a path forward. Our next steps will likely be to revise documentation for how to make changes to Samvera repos, then begin implementing communication plans with the help of others in the community for when we plan to make changes in as non-disruptive a way as possible for community work, and start updating repos in Samvera and Samvera Labs. We then like to report out to the community and provide recommendations as appropriate for addressing remediation edge cases where techniques like the Circle CI one might not be available or workable for local forks. For reference, here are some more of the links to our latest work and to our deliverables from 2020. If you're interested in using any of these tools or techniques that we've been testing, or just want to follow along with our progress, please go take a look. You can also find us here. We have a Slack channel and we're on Confluence. If you would like to contribute to our work, or if you are thinking about some of your own edge cases or have thoughts or concerns about the approaches that we're outlining and going with, we would love to talk to you. So please go ahead and reach out. And that is the update from my group.
Great, thank you, Kate. Next up is the Hyrax Valkyrie Development Working Group. So I'll hand it over to Tamsin now.
Hi, can you see my slides okay?
We can.
Great. So this is technically a working group update, but I have to confess that it's for a working group that hasn't functioned as such since sometime in 2019. So this is also a technical update for you, and I hope you'll accept the sort of awkwardness of that with grace. So this is Earning Your Wings in 2021. The background for the working group that this is a report out for is that Hyrax has been for some time now in the process of shifting. I call this a very boring middleware change out project, but it's one with great impact, shifting from Active Fedora as our sort of central persistence pattern for the repository objects to Valkyrie. Active Fedora has been in use since sometime in 2010. That's kind of incredible, more than a decade. And some of the context here is that in around 2015, with the advent of Fedora 4, there was a big sort of breaking change in the Active Fedora code base to support Fedora 4 that just sort of completely left all the versions of Active Fedora prior to 0. or 9.0 like in the past, and with it a bunch of repositories. Around 2017, Trey Pendragon started work on a project called Valkyrie, which uses a different, less tightly coupled to backend model for transitioning data from Ruby into persistence. That project got a release in 2018, and there has sort of, like at this point with the timescale that we're talking about, sort of more or less since the dawn of Valkyrie, there has been interest in moving the Hyrax project to it. Initially, that took the shape of a long-lived Valkyrie branch, which by 2018 was abandoned and sort of dead code. And in October of 2018 at Samvera Connect, there was a breakout where we sort of plotted to take a different approach, one that was targeted at avoiding breaking changes in the process of doing this sort of dramatic shift. And then there was a developer congress at Penn State in January of 2019, where we were subjected to ungodly temperatures. The working group itself formed up in the period after that and met for a number of sprints in some extent contribution to this project, and occasionally at developer congresses. Okay, so what is the outcome of the polar vortex at Penn State was this project called Wings, which is within the Hyrax main Hyrax line. Wings is a Valkyrie adapter that provides data compatibility with Active Fedora. So if you are a Hyrax app, you can write data using Valkyrie patterns with Wings and read it with Active Fedora and vice versa. Active Fedora is used by Wings under the hood, so that it keeps that dependency in place for Hyrax for the time being. But you can use Valkyrie native, quote unquote, Valkyrie native models. So you can, if you are an application, you can sort of pretend that Active Fedora isn't there and get round tripping with your existing legacy models. Wings is not a Fedora killer. It itself is tightly bound to Active Fedora, and I'll say that the Hyrax support plan for Fedora 5 and 6 is essentially summarized as Valkyrie. Wings is also not permanent. The idea is very much that Wings itself will go away, and other Valkyrie adapters, thank you for slide moving, other Valkyrie adapters will take its place. Okay, so where are we now? For Active Fedora apps, that is to say, if you have an existing Hyrax application, Wings supports porting existing models to Valkyrie. Again, you can sort of pretend that Active Fedora isn't there at the application layer. Hyrax also uses Valkyrie code whether you opt in or not. in a wide variety of internal functions. It does this in sort of two ways. One is that certain modules do a cast to Valkyrie and then do their work and then sort of cast back, or they don't have to cast back because they don't return a model type. The biggest example of this is a variety of background jobs, where active jobs sort of provides us a nice seam for cordoning off the Valkyrie code from the rest of the application. And then the other pattern that's in heavy use is if you have Valkyrie models in your application code base, then controllers will do the work of using that model sort of up and down the stack. There's still significant active Fedora code in Hyrax that has to be extracted in order for wings to be removed and broad Valkyrie support to be the story. I'll say a bit more about this in just a second. And then for Valkyrie native apps, so if you are a new app, you have a slightly different story, which is that many functions work straight out of the box with your Valkyrie native models, and you need not really pay much attention to active Fedora at all. There's also a variety of powerful new features that are being driven by the Valkyrie support. Some of these are in use whether you opt into Valkyrie or not, but things like configurable metadata schemas are sort of out of the box with the Valkyrie model in Hyrax. There's a Valkyrie usage guide in the Hyrax wiki that attempts to document the development patterns that we're recommending for Hyrax apps on Valkyrie. Work continues. I'd like to use this opportunity to draw folks' attention to the upcoming Developer Congress, where we'll certainly be working more on this. Again, much of the current development in Hyrax is sort of driven by this Valkyrie work or wrapped up in this Valkyrie work. So new patterns around change sets for forms, replacing Hydra form or Hydra editor rather, write-only adapters for indexing. There's a Hyrax publisher pub/sub bus based on dry events that is useful to both Valkyrie apps and active Fedora apps, but it's driven largely by the Valkyrie work as a motivating factor. There's a total actor stack replacement for Valkyrie apps. And there's increasing use of Valkyrie for non-active Fedora replacement functions like collection branding, file storage. The first non-active Fedora Hyrax application is under development at the University of California in the collaboration between UCSB, who I work for, and UC San Diego. This is a a staff-facing digital object management system that we're calling Comet. We started development, we're in the middle of our second sprint now, and we're using Postgres and S3 compatible object storage via Valkyrie. This is a Hyrax application, and we're expecting to move fast on extending Hyrax support through development on this. More adoption is needed. We need engagement from existing adopters to be able to make this very robust. This is always the story that I'm telling. Please engage, please engage, please engage. You can convert your existing Hyrax application. I'd love to talk to you about how to do that. There's always space for people to contribute to Hyrax itself, both by providing feedback, by working on code and documentation, and by reviewing pull requests. Yay. I think I'm just slightly over time, so I'll take questions in channel.
Yes, there was one question from Rob. Is there a list of things that don't work under Valkyrie native Hyrax? We can answer that in Slack, or if you've got a quick answer, Tamsin.
I don't have such a list, but I'd love to talk about it in Slack at greater length.
Okay, next up is expanding Hyku's versatility with custom themes by Leanne and April, and I will hand it over to them.
Hello, since we had a request for more pets, I just want to put my dog up there for you. And let me share my screen. So today, April and I are going to, well, first, can you all see my slides and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So today we're going to talk about expanding Hyku's versatility with custom themes. To start by introducing ourselves. So my name's Leanne Bradford. I go by the pronouns she, her, and I'm a senior software developer at Notch 8. And I'm joined by April.
Hi, everybody. My name is April Rieger. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a software developer at Notch 8.
Just to get a little overview, we did have some really good introductions to Hyku and Hyrax earlier, but in a nutshell, the way I'm going to be talking about Hyku is as a multi-tenant Hyrax application, which means that our Hyku application that we've been working on has the ability to host multiple repositories within the same application. And each tenant has its own users, objects, and its own look and feel. The project that we are adding the theming to is a PALNI-PALCI project. PALNI is the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana, and PALCI is the Pennsylvania Academic Library Consortium, Inc. And this is an ongoing project. We started a few years back with a phase 1 of theming. And in that phase, we really focused on branding for the individual repositories. So we did, and we do contribute these items back into Hyku, but the items that we worked on in phase 1 were the ability for each tenant to upload logos and banner images, to add default collection and work images. We gave them expanded color selections for their theming, and the ability to choose Google fonts for headlines fonts and for body fonts. And we also implemented a custom CSS style sheet. So just right from the admin section of the Hyku application, each tenant, each repository could add their own styles and style sheets. And so what this looked like for here is, this is default Hyku branding with the theming. This is the Samvera Community repository. This is where the Samvera Community hosts all of our slides for today, should be added up here as well, and our talks. So, and this is hosted on Hyku App Service, which is a Notch 8 hosted Hyku instance. So what we're talking about today, really, what we're going to show you are some of the phase 2 changes that we have made. And this goes beyond the theming, but more towards, more beyond the branding, but more towards theming for each of the individual repositories. So what the PALNI-PALCI consortium has noticed is that they've had multiple use cases. So not all of their members wanted to use Hyku as an institutional repository, and Hyku is really focused as institutional repository. So they really wanted to add themes so that it could update the focus for each of, it can better meet the needs of their membership. And what they decided to do is add theming for different use cases. So our solution we came up with due to budgets and times and other reasons, we wanted to just give the greatest amount of flexibility with our theming. So we went with a modular approach. So we basically started with feature flipping, where you could turn on and off content on the homepage. And we also decided to add different themes for different sections. So we have themes for the homepage, we have themes for the show page, and then we have a way to choose the different layouts for the search results page. And then we also added in a new content block that each repository can add, which would have informational text about the repository that would be added to the homepage. Here's a screenshot of the feature flippers. In the admin section of the application, there's a features tab. And we added, I think in this phase, the featured works. You can hide or show the featured works on the homepage, or you can hide or show the recently uploaded. And that goes along with hiding or showing the share your work button and the featured researcher section. The first piece to selecting a theme is we've added to the appearance panel, the appearance section on the admin dashboard, a new tab called themes. And here you can see the theme selector. You would be able to choose a homepage theme, a search results theme, and a show page theme. And here we've selected, I'm showing the homepage theme section. And when you select a homepage theme, right below the search select box, you're going to have some theme notes. So this theme that we have called Cultural Repository is recommended for cultural repositories. And it also gives information about some of the features that you would use with this theme, such as a banner image or different content blocks. And as you select each item, this populates with not only the information you need for that theme, but where it gives you a link to where you can add those items. And then also we dynamically load a wireframe so you can see a preview of what your theme is going to look like. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to April, and she's going to talk about the different home pages. She designed some different homepage themes and did a really wonderful job. She's going to walk you through that now. So April.
Thanks so much, Leanne. All right, so this is the Cultural Repository themed homepage, and some of the features that we were asked to include is an all-in-one navigation menu that includes the Hyku's main and sub-navigation menus. We also included a facetable search on the actual homepage. And we included the additional content block that Leanne was talking about. It's really cool because we're able to link it back to the admin dashboard where the admin user can then update the content as needed, as well as the fonts, the colors, and the text attributes. Should we continue the trend from yesterday? Bing! Here we have the institutional repository theme homepage. Some of the features to note are the carousel of statistics by resource type. This is custom for the PALNI Policy Consortium. When we merge this back into Hyku, we're planning on making some changes to be more generic off of the default work types. This theme also includes a larger collections section. It only renders the top level collections, no children collections. And then also it adds the homepage text content block. Bing! Here we have the neutral repository themed homepage. A couple of features to note are that we've included the featured works into a carousel on the homepage, and we added the homepage content block as well. And that's all I have. Back to you, Leanne.
Thanks, April. The next piece I'm going to show you is the show page work. We are going to be adding in 2 different show page options. The first is what we're calling a text-based show page. Just a note is we're hoping to add catchy names to all of these things in the future, but right now these are working titles. We're also going to do an image-based show page, which is still in progress. So I do not have screenshots to show you today. So again, you will have a select box where you will select your theme. You will get notes based on your theme. So in this case, the text-based show page theme is recommended for use with institutional repositories, and you dynamically load a wireframe, which will show you the layout. And this is the show page, text-based show page theme. You can see on the left side is what it looks like without an item for a universal viewer. And on the right side, you would see what it would look like with the universal viewer. And the main change is that we moved the relationship section and the citations and social sharing buttons into a sidebar option on the right side. Also, a note on that show page is a future piece of work that we didn't have time to implement currently is that is going to have, we're hoping to have comments and ratings. So for different items that might be different items in the repository that other users can give comments and ratings on that material. And then finally, for search result pages, what we did was we leveraged the existing blacklight layouts. Currently, there's 4 layouts. There's a list view, a gallery view, a masonry view, and a slideshow view. The slideshow view is not functioning, and I think it's going to be removed, so we're not going to implement that view. But here's what they look like. The default list view is on the upper left, a gallery view is on the upper right, and a masonry view is in the bottom middle. Currently, each end user who's using the application can use the buttons to select which view they prefer, but the list view is always default. So what we did was when we select a search results page view in our theme selector, it actually sets one of these views as the default, and end users can still have the option to override and use their preferred view. So how does this all work? Basically, these are the ways that we implemented the theming. We added controller methods, which checks to see if a theme has been loaded or selected. And if that theme has been selected, then it prepends a view path into the view. It prepends your theme folder into the view paths. So what that means is each time you load a page, Rails looks for where it's going to find the views, and we put your theme folder first at the front of that list. So it's going to go look for your theme views first to see if you have any view overrides. Also, when you select your theme and save it, it's going to add that theme name to the body tag as a class so that you can hook into it via CSS. And we also did the work to load your theme and the wireframe preview into the theme selector form, just using JavaScript. Now I'm going to go over real quick how you can add your own theme. So part of our work here was just to make this as simple as possible for people in the future to add themes. So we made it so there's 4 simple steps right now. You're going to add your theme information to a YAML file. We're going to add view overrides, add your custom CSS, and add a wireframe. So you can see here, my demo, I'm going to add a theme called Bubbles. I'm going to add it to a file in the config folder called homethemes.yaml. And I'm going to make sure that I have information about whether or not it uses a banner image, a featured researcher, homepage text, or marketing text, what our theme name is going to look like to the end user, and also some notes. So in this case, my Bubbles theme is going to be recommended to highlight a featured researcher. One thing to note about how we did this themes is that we really are reliant on the naming conventions and the location of files. So the location is really important. But in the theme selector form, this is where it pulls the information to hide and show content and to dynamically load information about your theme. Then we're going to add our view overrides. This is very important. We've added a theme folder inside the views folder, and you're going to create a folder with your theme name. In this case, it's @view_themes_bubbles. And then any overrides need to be in the same path as it would be looking for in Hyku or Hyrax. So here you can see I'm adding an override to the home content partial. And then we're going to add our file for CSS. Again, we have in app asset style sheets, we've created a theme folder, and we're going to load your CSS inside the theme folder, and it needs to be the same name as your theme. So in this case, it's bubbles.scss. And to scope our CSS, we always want to start with our theme name as the opening class so that our theme CSS is not going to bleed into other themes. And then finally, we load our wireframe. And the wireframes need to be in app assets, images, themes. And you would make a folder after your theme name. So I made a folder called Bubbles, and then I copied bubbles.jpg. Right now, your wireframe needs to be in a JPEG format for it to work. We're not currently can't support other file extensions. And then here it is. This is my Bubbles theme. I just made some CSS to round things out, and I highlighted the feature researcher, and I moved collections and featured works around on the homepage. And it should be that simple. So what's next? First, we want to contribute this feature back to Hyku. We do have a little bit of some changes. We have some PALNI PALC specific code in our theme, so we want to go ahead and make it more generic. But we are hoping to have this contributed back by the summer. Then the next step is to refactor so we can add future themes as Rails engines. The hope is that from going forward, that we would host all these themes on Ruby gems if they are used as a Rails engine. And that way, each application can just select which themes they want to offer by adding them in their gem file. And you can either add as many or as little as you want. So at Notch8, we have a theming client coming up where we're doing some Hyku theming, and we're hopeful that we can make one a Rails engine. And that way we can have a guide for the community to follow, who can set up the pattern for you, and that anybody can make themes going forward. And that's all we have. Any questions?
So I don't see any questions. There's just one in Slack, just about theming. Let's say next up, our Advancing Hyku 2-year project update. So we'll pass it off.
Hi, everyone. This is going to be, I'm going to share my screen again. Lost it. Can you see that?
Yep.
Great. So this is our second year of the Advancing Hyku project, and some of the content will be familiar and some of it will be updated. This is a text-heavy, time-light presentation since we have just a little slot here, and of course these slides will be shared. Speaking today are myself, I'm Ellen Ramsey, she, her, at University of Virginia, and Brian Hull from Ubiquity Press. Huge thanks to Ilkay Holt for generating this slide deck and doing heroic work with community coordination, both in Samvera Virtual Connect right now, but also just throughout the community during her time with this project. And just a reminder of what our project is and is not. We are funded by the Arcadia funder, and that's the charitable foundation of Lisbeth Rousing. And we have an extension which was announced a couple of months ago through February 22, which will help us get more of our work done. We're very happy about that. And just to reiterate what the project is intended to accomplish, it's really to make the Hyku implementation of institutional repository holding work better in Hyku. Things that we don't intend for this project to be are on the right. We don't intend to build new solutions from whole cloth. We are not intending to redirect resources from Hyrax code base. And of course, we don't think that institutional repositories are the answer to all open and sustainable scholarly communication challenges. Deliverables from this project, some of them have already been contributed back to the community code. And I'm realizing as I look at these bullet points that our DOI work that Chris Colvard did is not reflected in these bullets. And that is a huge oversight. And many thanks for that. It's been quite significant. But one of the things that we are focusing on is to make sure that things that already exist and that are in wide use in the academic and institutional and repository communities work with Hyku code. So things like on paywall and to skip down a couple of points, ORCID integration, which is something that we've been working quite hard on. And then to also improve what we see in terms of metrics. This has long been something that some of the popular to remain unnamed repository solutions have really touted, and that Hyku really has wanted to add, and the community has really wanted to add into Hyku. I'm going to skip the last two bullet points for the moment because they're going to come up in a second when we talk about community work and feature prioritization. So to point back to work, and this was mentioned by Kevin Kachansky as well in the Hyku community update, community input is, of course, the soul of Samvera, and so we've made some adjustments to our timeline, to our priorities based on conversations and survey results that we've received from all of you, and also potential adopters of an advanced Hyku. And so OAI PMH was moved earlier. There were some changes to priorities in terms of what you can view in a browser versus how you interact with files. And then there are some really interesting impacts for future work, which most likely will go beyond the scope of our current project. And that, again, comes back to the community and how we pass on what's next and what remains to be done and what is complete. We just love this image, so we put it in here because it's really, really pretty. And if you want to know more about what was prioritized, what the contents are, there's a whole blog post about this on our public webpage. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brian Hull at this point, who's going to talk more about what Ubiquity is doing in terms of moving forward with our roadmap and features and development.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. Hi, everybody. So this is our Gantt chart. Unlike many charts, the color coding here simply means green means something is complete, yellow is in progress, and red is not started. So we're not late on things. The project's going fairly well. As I'll show on the next slide, we've been working a lot on alignment with the latest version of Hyku 3. We've also been contributing a lot of code back that Ubiquity had developed for the British Library and Pacific University. And that work is now about 70% complete. So we're now moving on to a lot of the other features on the platform, such as the ORCID integration, the auto-population from unpaywall, and so forth. So the project is moving along quite smoothly, and this roadmap can be viewed on our project website if you want to take a closer look. Next slide, please. And just to summarize, so the completed work so far has been the Hyku 3 collaboration and contributions, and that's involved merging in a lot of things like bulk racks and tenant theming, embargoes. And we ran an architecture assessment with the British Library where they went out to the community, and first of all, they assessed the platform themselves and then went out to the community to ask for feedback as well. And we, as Ellen said, we then prioritized our work based on that feedback. And that work is now complete. We're now testing our alignment with Hyku 2 and 3 and our initial repository metrics, which are the views and downloads part. Then we're in progress and testing the feedback of key features from the BL and Pacific. We're about 70% of the way through that work. And we're now really getting stuck into the really interesting work packages. Not to say the other work wasn't, but the new features that we really are excited about, like the author ID and profile sync with ORCID, whereby we can everything a researcher uploads into the repository can be synced up into their ORCID profile, sort of incentivizing them to do so. And auto population from places like Unpaywall, which would really help to drive content into the repository and make it a lot easier on admins to fill the repository up. And after that, we're working on in-browser display of works, trying to make sure that all file types are viewable either in the universal viewer or in an alternative viewer, with a lot of consideration of things like accessibility and so forth going into that work package. And we'll also be looking at preservation packaging and collaboration with the Academic Preservation Trust there as well. So that there'll be a lot of features coming up. And as the last point there makes clear, our UX team will be reaching out to the community. If anybody would like to test any of these features or give feedback on prototypes, we'd really appreciate it. And we'll be reaching out through Twitter and our blog to ask for help at those times. And we'll be previewing all of that, all of these new features as publicly as we can to get feedback as well as we go. Okay, back to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Brian. The last two slides, I want to give you all a sneak peek at some of the community work that will be ready for sharing more broadly very soon. I know this has been going on for quite a while, but we hinted at this in the Hyku community update and in our own work. So mapping user stories and concurrently mapping the roadmap in a way that's a lot more visual rather than the current than what we've had as a text-based version, to help us do what I think the Hyrax community has been doing quite well, which is picking up and distributing of work and marking things as completed and or prioritized and completed. So we're looking forward to that work with the community. And just as a hint at that, things like preservation packages, there is interest across the community in that, and I know that there are some interesting things going on there. So, being able to move work from one project to another, or not duplicate that work really effectively, is of course the objective of this kind of work. That is the end of our formal presentation. It looks like we even have a minute for questions. So we will take those in chat, or I'm happy to take them in Slack as well. All right, minute's up. We'll pass it on.
No questions. So let me so next up, our last presentation of the day, serverless functions, how tiny experiment became our best work. And I will hand it over to Karen.
Okay, hi. I am Karen Shaw. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a developer from Northwestern University Library. I'm here today to talk about how we use serverless functions to cost-effectively scale out our new digital repository application. So this story really begins at the finish line, or actually when we were almost there. As some of you who may have heard my colleague Michael Klein's presentation yesterday will know, Meadow is our new AWS Elixir ingest and repository application. We had been developing Meadow for over a year, and we're due to go live on March 17th of this year. But what happened was that about a month prior to our launch date, our go live was in serious jeopardy. The problem centered around our batch ingest feature. I haven't watched it yet, but I believe Michael also demoed this feature yesterday during his presentation. The batch ingest functionality, which we'd been developing over the past year, was fast. Compared with our old system, Donut, where ingesting 5,000 TIFFs ran for hours, generally overnight, Meadow could ingest 5,000 files in about a half an hour. But the reality was we only really truly began to test at scale in the last month before launch. During development, we had tested large batches and we had tested large files, but we hadn't really tested large batches of large files. And by large files, we're talking about image files, TIFFs between 2 and 4 gigs. What we were seeing was that batches of any size containing a number of these large files were starting off fast and then processing for hours, getting stuck and never completing. Behind the scenes, our ingest is backed by a pipeline developed using Elixir's Broadway package and Amazon SQS and SNS. Broadway is a framework designed to let you build concurrent and multi-stage data ingestion and processing pipelines with Elixir. It allows developers to consume data efficiently from different sources known as producers like Amazon's SQS. So our pipeline for image work types currently has 7 steps or actions. This is an older diagram. There's 2 more now. The processing steps are extract MIME type, generate file set digests, extract EXIF metadata, copy file to preservation, and create pyramid TIFF. Most of these actions are modules written in Elixir. A couple were written in Node, and then the corresponding Elixir pipeline action module effectively shelled out using an Elixir port, which is a way to run an Elixir or an external program right from Elixir. And as far as scaling, our attitude about scaling the pipeline was, in retrospect, maybe a little cavalier or unconcerned. We were using Elixir, right? This was in the bag. Broadway was designed for concurrent data processing pipelines, and all we were going to need to do was tune some concurrency and processing configurations. We felt confident that when we needed to, it would be easy to just scale out. But what we found in practice was that this was not exactly the case. We were running a single Meadow task in a single ECS container. Our Meadow app is deployed in a Docker container. And so a few of those processing action steps are really RAM and CPU intensive. And what we were seeing was that the big files needed all of the system resources and in fact block the container, no matter how many producers or consumers were concurrently running. So what we first tried to do was scale vertically. We spun up multiple ECS containers, each running a subset of the Meadow processes. So for example, we would have one container running the web app, and then we could say have 50 containers running the create pyramid TIFF process. But when tested out, the problems with this approach were first, with ECS, there was not a built-in way to orchestrate all this auto scaling. We'd either have to just leave our max containers running, shut them on or off manually, or we'd have to implement the code and logic to scale up and down based on demand. And during a conference call with our AWS rep, we were led to believe that this was not a trivial task. So this meant it would have cost a lot of money at around, I think, $30 a month each per container. And finally, when processing batches of large files, our CPU and RAM intensive processing steps were still blocking the containers even with super large ones. So in a nutshell, we couldn't have run enough containers if we wanted to, and it was prohibitively expensive. We realized we had run into a classic problem of scaling. At some point, things get blocked when scaling vertically. So we were frankly a bit demoralized at this point, and David, our dev team lead / product owner, was a little frustrated and started pressing the team to consider moving in a Lambda-based direction. But the developers were hesitant to trash what we'd iterated on for a year and move in an entirely different direction with just weeks to go. We didn't know very much about Lambda development. We wondered if we could learn fast enough, and we still believed in our ability to scale our Elixir code directly. Wouldn't Lambdas create a headache for us doing local development? And also, weren't Lambdas going to be cost prohibitive doing all this intensive processing? So what happened is that simultaneously to all this, we started to, we were beginning the early stages of prepping the actual data for migration out of our old system. And we needed to move the objects in our old repositories Fedora binary storage bucket to a new bucket. And in the process, we wanted to rename the files and add a couple digests to the object metadata. We decided to use S3 batch operations to do this, which can run an operation, can call Lambda on all the files in an S3 bucket. So we had a tiny Lambda that did this digesting and copying. We had 400,000 plus objects in our Fedora binary bucket, and this job ran in a little over an hour, had 4 errors, and produced a report that was rerunnable. To say the least, we were really impressed. It was really seeing this that I think gave us the confidence boost we needed to start moving in the Lambda direction. And the clincher was this. We ran this batch operation multiple times during our testing and in migration, the actual migration. And the total cost was, I think, $9. And in fact, it could have cost less, as we certainly had the Lambda over provisioned for what it needed. It was so inexpensive that we didn't believe it and spent far too much time triple checking our math. David, the PO, was looking at the AWS costs dashboard after this batch operation ran and stated, if I'm doing my math right, this is either going to cost us 30 cents or $30,000. Thankfully, it ended up being 30 cents. So as an experiment, we decided to swap in one Lambda for the first step that was blocking our ingest pipeline. And we had built our pipeline to be flexible, and this flexibility made the swap in pretty painless. The action just called out to the Lambda instead of doing the processing itself. And note that that is pretty much the entire code of the Lambda. It's tiny. And as a result of this, for the first time, we saw large batches of large files make it past the digesting step. Then they bottlenecked at the next step, but this result was enough to make us decide to go for it. So we divided up the remaining 3 Lambdas among the 3 developers. We wrote an some Elixir code wrapper that either is going to evoke the Lambda or run the same node script that's in the Lambda locally, depending on the configured environment you're in. So it can run, just the node script locally if you're in development. The Lambda code lives in our Meadow GitHub repo and is deployed via Terraform with the rest of the Meadow application. This makes things like roles and permissions easy, and also it made local development easy. And the result, it worked. It cleared all the bottlenecks in our pipeline, and we were seeing processing times for a 5,000 batch of large TIFFs at about a half an hour. And we made our go live deadline. So, and what about the costs? This is a screenshot of our Lambda CloudWatch dashboard for the month of March, showing Lambda cost and optimization. March does cover actual data migration from our old system, so use is almost certainly many times over what it would be in an average month. But what you can see in the total cost columns is that the cost to run these Lambdas is cheap. In some cases, it's just pennies. The Stack P AAAF Lambda is actually our AAAF server, which is not one of the four I've been talking about, and it's used by other applications at Northwestern than just Meadow. I also should point out that Meadow EXIF cost, which is a little higher, we've since done some optimization on that, so I don't believe it's even costing that much now. So at this point, we breathed a huge sigh of relief. AWS has been extremely cost effective for us. A couple of quick gotchas to point out. The first was trying to use EFS as temp storage for the Lambda to get around the Lambda temp storage limit of, I think, 512 megabytes. We were running up against an EFS burst throughput credit limit. So EFS's throughput is calculated by accrual throughput based on total storage. So when you're using it as temp storage, you burn through the initial throughput allocation and never accrue enough again to make up for it. So you get one fast burst and that's it. After a day or two of banging our heads against a wall, we ended up being able to just refactor around this using memory, and now we're not using EFS at all. The other was this, we started on the super large files running out of memory. And this stumped us because we created all these Lambdas and provisioned much greater memory allocation than seemed necessary. And we discovered that AWS does not increase this max old memory space parameter when you increase the memory limit of the Lambda, which seemed odd. But we ended up just being able, after being stumped for a bit, being able to just adjust that parameter right in the Lambdas and get around that. Next steps, while terraforming made this easy for us to work with in development and testing, it does make these potentially less reusable. So we hope to refactor the Lambdas in order to possibly publish them in AWS's serverless application repository. We hope to be able to do that within the next year. So takeaways, extracting extensive processing steps in serverless functions to do the heavy lifting made a lot of sense for us. This approach isn't specific to frameworks or languages that we were using. It's a good approach potentially for anyone in the cloud. For us, the AWS Lambda for intensive processing steps has been extremely cost effective. It didn't slow us down. We did all the work I just talked about basically in one sprint. So this approach didn't take us any longer than the traditional approach we've been using. And then also a reminder to our own team to build for scale from the start, which we're always trying to remember. So that's all I have. I don't know if there's questions or time for questions, but if feel free to reach out to us on Samvera Slack with anything. I'm more than happy to share experiences.
Great, thank you, Karen. All right, so that's the end of our program for today. I want to thank all the presenters and everyone on the planning committee who helped put this together. Let me put up the slide for choices and Samvera Connect this fall. I'm going to hand it back over to Heather to do any wrap up. Thank you.
Not much wrap up. Thanks everyone for an excellent conference. Thanks to all of our presenters and to all of the planners and for all of you for attending. And join us for Samvera Connect online again this fall and at our developer conference in May if you're interested. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming, everyone.